Hey guys, welcome to the Sysadmin Tutorials YouTube channel. In today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at how to automate your NetApp installation using Ansible. What I've got up on screen here now is my NetApp simulator. It's already been provisioned, so what we're going to be doing is reinitializing it, starting from scratch, running through the cluster setup wizard. We're just going to log in as admin, and then we're going to be creating a user account, which is what we're going to be using for the Ansible server to connect into the simulator. And with that, what we're going to be doing is I've created a playbook, and in the playbook, it's going to go through quite a few tasks, and we'll go through that when we get to it. But basically, we want to be preparing the NetApp simulator for a VMware vSphere NFS installation. So with that being said, we'll get started with initializing this NetApp simulator. So on the left-hand side, I've got the console window, and on the right-hand side, I've got the SSH window. So on the SSH window, I'm just going to halt the simulator. Yep. And then now I'm going to move into the console window. And what I'm going to be doing is pressing Control-C on the boot, and we want it to go into the boot menu so we can use Option 4 to reinitialize all the disks there. Okay, we're at the halt screen now, so I'm just going to press Enter to reboot the simulator, and I'll keep my fingers on Control-C because the option does come up pretty quick, and we want to go into the boot menu. So I'm going to tell you when to press it. So I'm going to press Enter now to have it reboot. And we can press Enter here to boot immediately. And here we want to press Control-C. So we want to enter into the boot menu. All right, now that we're in the boot menu, we're going to press Option 4, Clean Configuration and Initialize All Disks. So I'll press 4 and Enter. And the simulator asks us to zero disks, reset config, and install a new file. So just a confirmation there. We'll type in yes. And another confirmation that this will erase all the data on the disks. Are you sure? Yes. Press Enter. So what's going to happen is the simulator is going to be reinitialized, all the data is going to be wiped, and then it's going to take us to the cluster setup wizard. I'll press Enter here just to boot immediately. Okay, so here we are at the cluster setup wizard for my NetApp simulator. We're going to run through this quite quickly because I really want to focus more on the Ansible playbook and show you how that works. And this is in conjunction with a blog post that I wrote. So I will post the link for that in the YouTube video, and you can go and check that out. It's got some additional information there. And I'll also post a link to my GitHub, which will contain all the Ansible playbook as well. But more on that when we get to it. So let's just run through this really quickly. So we'll just type yes. The management interface that we're going to be using is E0C. So anything in the square bracket there is default. So I'll just press Enter. The IP address I'll give is 192.168.1.51. And the subnet mask is /24. Default gateway will be 192.168.1.1. And here you have the option to continue the setup through the GUI. However, we're going to press Enter and continue the setup through the CLI. So I'll just press Enter now. And we're going to be creating a new cluster, so I'll just type in create. The default here to set up a single node cluster is no, but I'll select yes here. I'll type in a password for my admin user account and confirm. For the cluster name, I'm going to be calling it cluster 9.6. And the 9.6 just comes because we're running Ontap 9.6 here. Okay, we won't be adding in any license keys at this point because we're going to have our Ansible Playbook install all our simulator licenses for us automatically. So I'll just press Enter, and that's going to skip this license key step. For the cluster management port, we're going to be installing that on E0C. So I'll type in E0C here and press Enter. And the cluster management IP will be 192.168.1.50. Netmask 255.255.255.0 or /24. And the default gateway, you can see it's already pulled that up in the defaults there of 192.168.1.1. So I'm just going to press Enter. The DNS domain name, I'm going to be using the same DNS domain name as my Windows Active Directory DNS server, and that is vmlab.local. I only have one Active Directory domain controller in my lab, and that has an IP address of 192.168.1.101, and this is where I'm going to be entering that IP address. Now, where is the controller located? You can put anything here. I'm just going to type VM lab. For the system config backup destination address, I'm just going to press enter here to skip this step. And that's it. That completes the cluster setup wizard. So what I'm going to do now is open up a GUI interface through to the NetApp simulator, and I'll open up a new Chrome, and we're going to browse to HTTPS 192.168.1.50, which is our cluster IP address. Once we're here, we'll just accept the certificate. And I'm going to log in with my admin username and password. Okay, so here we are. I just want to show you a couple of things because these are the things that are going to be automated with our Ansible playbook. So if I go into storage and aggregates, you can see here our aggregate name, aga0_cluster96_01, which is actually the node name of the first node. The other thing I want to show you is in SVMs. You can see that there's no SVMs created here. We're also going to be doing that with our playbook. Under networking, we can also see no subnets have been created. Network interfaces, there's only the default interfaces that have been created. The broadcast domain, again, only the defaults have been created. And if we go into licenses, you can see here that no licenses have been installed either. And the last section that I want to show you is in the settings and date and time. And we can see the date, the time zone, etc, etc. And you can see that we don't have any time servers here. So what I'll do is I'll minimize the GUI window for now. And we're going to switch over to our Ansible server. Okay, so here's our Ansible server. So the way that I started with creating my first Ansible playbook was I wanted to go through and install all the simulator licenses one by one. So if you've installed the simulator before, you can see that it can be quite a pain to manually do that and enter in each license key. So I wanted to automate that. So I created a playbook that goes through and installs all the licenses one by one, and that was it. And it took a couple of seconds to run, and all the licenses were installed. So the next bit, what I did was I wanted to think about what are the steps involved in creating or setting up a NetApp cluster that's ready for a VMware vSphere environment that will be mounting NFS volumes. And a few things came up. The first thing was we need to set the time on the cluster. The second thing was the time zone as well. And then we wanted to rename the root aggregates for our naming convention. We want to create and online a new data aggregate. So I'm just reading this off to the right because I've made some notes. We're going to create a vServer, set up a VLAN, create a broadcast domain, subnet creation, create an NFS LIF, start the NFS service, create an NFS export rule, add DNS settings to our vServer, create the first NFS volume, and then create an additional NFS volume as well. So what I did was I made a playbook for each one of those steps. And once I got all of them running, I created one big playbook and integrated all those steps into that playbook. So that's what we're going to be doing today, or that's what I'm going to be showing you today. And that's this file here. It's the 00 NetApp full install.yaml or .yml. So I'm going to edit that file right now. And we're just going to go through it quickly, and then we're going to run it and see how quick it is to deploy all these settings to a brand new NetApp cluster. Now, first thing, I've just got a couple of comments up here on the top of the file, and that is we need you to create a Ansible login. So that login is going to be used purely for Ansible. We're not going to be using the admin account because I think it's pretty bad practice. And to do that, you can simply copy the lines here for 1A, 1B, and 1C, and you can just paste them into your CLI session for your NetApp simulator. So we're going to do that first. I'll log in as admin. And now what I'm going to do is just copy these 3 lines in. When I put the first line in, it's going to ask me for a password for the Ansible user. So I'll enter in that password now. For demonstration purposes, I'm using password123 with a capital P, and you'll be able to see that in the YAML file just off onto the left. I'll point it out when we get over to it. Okay, once that's all in, we'll do the second line. So what this is doing is it's just creating the user and adding the user to specific roles which are necessary to run the Ansible playbook against the NetApp cluster. And last one. Okay, and so we're all done with that. So if we move over to the beginning of the file, which we're looking at these 3 dashes here. So each Ansible playbook starts with 3 dashes, and then we specify the host. So this is the host that Ansible's running on. So I'm on the local host here, so therefore you can see local host. And we give the playbook a name. So the name of this playbook is NetApp NFS System Setup. So that's a title for the overall playbook with all the tasks that are contained within this file. Next up, we move on to variables. So I've got a list of, or quite a few variables here, and next to it I've got a hash and then a little comment. So if you want to take this script from my GitHub and run it in your lab, I would go through each of the variables and change them to suit your environment. So you may want to change the cluster name, for example, from cluster 9.6 to your own name. You may want to change the password. You may not even want to use the Ansible as a username. You may change that up here as well. So these are all the variables, and what we have is we've got the variable name, for example, NTP servers, and then we have the value. The value is the IP address of the NTP server. And if we look at another one, we'll have the variable here, and then we have the variable value, which is aga0 underscore cluster 9601. So we set up all our variables first, and then what we do is we move on down to what they call tasks. We'll move the file down here. And so tasks are like actions. So under the tasks section, the first task or action is going to be installing the NetApp simulator licenses. So to do that, we run or call up on a module. The module to install the NetApp simulator licenses is called NA_Ontap_cluster. And if you want to look, or if you want to know what modules you need to run specific tasks, head on over to my blog post. Again, the link will be in the YouTube video summary page. And what you can do is click on the link there and you'll have a look and see all the storage modules that are available for NetApp in the Ansible website. So to install NetApp simulator licenses, we need the NA Ontap cluster module. The state present means check if the value exists. If it doesn't exist, then install it. So we have that set as present. Now the cluster name is going to be calling upon the variable called cluster name as well. And to call upon a variable, you need to put it into quotation and then the brackets with a space and then the variable name. So the variable name comes from the variables that we set further up in the file that we showed you earlier. And I have a variable called cluster name there. So that's the value that's going to be set for this parameter cluster name. With the license code, so when I was looking at this and trying to learn it, what happened was that you had to pretty much put one license code per line, and then you'd have a task. You'd have one task per license code. So I didn't want to do that. I wanted to loop it, and coming from a PowerShell background, we're pretty familiar with looping, so I didn't know how to do that in Ansible. So did a quick Mr. Google search and I found out how to do it. So the way that you do it is you have the parameter license code. You put in the brackets here item, and this item refers to whatever's in this loop. So what it's going to do is it's going to go through each item and install each license code there one by one and loop through. Once it's finished, it'll move on to the next task. So the next task here is we're going to set the NTP. So NTP server, again, it's calling a variable from the NTP server's variable list above. Then we move on to setting the time zone. Now the time zone, I couldn't find a specific module that will set the time zone for the cluster. And so what you can do is you can actually call a module called NA Ontap command and run specific CLI commands against the cluster there. So this is the actual CLI command without all the commas and quotations and stuff. It's cluster date modify dash time zone and then Australia/Sydney. So that's the command we're going to push over to the NetApp cluster, and it's just going to run that CLI command as if you were on the SSH shell. So one thing that I forgot to mention is that for each task, you need to specify a login to the system. And what I should have mentioned before, if we just go back up to the top of the file, and this is what I found on David Blackwell's blog, which is a really cool little trick, is that in the variables for the login, if we put and login here, anything underneath and login, so for example, hostname, username, password, HTTPS is true, validate certificates false. So all that is going to be contained in this and login. So instead of specifying hostname, username, password, HTTPS, validate certs under each task, what you can simply do is go down here. And if you have a look at the first task here, installing the NetApp simulator licenses, you can simply go less than, colon, space, asterisk, login. And that will refer to that variable up the top so that you don't need to specify usernames and passwords all over the place in your playbook. The other thing that I wanted to mention as well is you're probably thinking that's pretty unsecure to have a username and password within the file. And yes, 100% agree. There is another way that you can do it where you call a password file, and I was doing some research last night. You can encrypt some passwords, enter that into the file, and so on and so on. So you can make it much, much more secure. But as this is running in my lab as a demonstration, I don't really have any issue with it being in the file itself. So we'll move on, and we've gone through the set time zone with the CLI command. We're going to rename the root aggregate. So it's going to specify what was the original aggregate name, and then what's the new aggregate name. So we're going to create a new data aggregate, and some of the parameters in here are the name, how many disks to add to the aggregate, wait for it to come online before moving on, and then the timeout is 300 seconds, and the login command again. Next, we'll create a vServer. So here's all the vServer commands, parameters, and the associating variables for that. Next, we'll set up a VLAN. So we'll go through, do the VLAN setup. We'll create the broadcast domain. We'll create the subnet, and we'll create an NFS lif. So this is another command that we had to specify as a CLI because I could not find a module that does exactly what I wanted it to do with some of the options that I've specified in this network interface create command. So I thought it was just easier just to do creating the own command myself. And there might be a module that does it, but at the time of doing this lab, I did not find it. So therefore, I just specified the command itself. So after creating the NFS lif, we're going to start NFS, go through, do the NFS export rules, so which subnets can access NFS. We'll go on, we'll set DNS for the SVM. We'll create our first NFS volume, and we'll create one additional volume as well. The additional volume is going to be called Ansible vol. I think that's what I said in the variable. And that's it. That's the whole playbook. So again, this is going to be available on my GitHub page. So you can go ahead, grab components of it. You can manipulate it, do whatever you want with it. So for now, I'm going to quit out of VI. And what we'll do is we'll run the Ansible playbook, and you can see how fast it is. You can even time it. I might even put a timer up on screen to see how fast it is to provision a new system. Okay, to run the Ansible playbook, we simply type in ansible-playbook and then the name of the YAML file, and we'll press enter, and away we go. So where it says here play, this is the name of the playbook. This is the tasks that it's running now. And anything in yellow are changes that it's doing. Anything in green is stuff that's already been configured and it doesn't need to configure it, so it just skips it. At the end of the playbook, you'll see also a summary. And that's it. your system is set up and ready to go. So you can see here at the bottom, there's a summary of what's been changed, or the number of changes. And that's about it. So now what we're going to do is log back into the GUI, and we're going to check on some of these settings. Where we left off was at the time window. So if I refresh this page, so I'll just go general and then back to date and time. You can see here we've got Australia, Sydney, and we've got our time server. If we go back and check on our aggregates now, you can see that the root aggregate got renamed, and also we've got the creation of the new data aggregate here. So that's where we've placed our NFS volumes. We'll head on over to SVMs. Here we have our SVM, SVM1 with the NFS protocol up and running. Next we'll go and check the networking. So here's our NFS subnet with the subnet IP subnet information and the number of IPs that we allocated into the pool. I only allocated 2 there. Clicking on network interface, you can see that we have an NFS lift set up. The Ethernet ports, you can see that under E0D we've created VLAN 5. And in the broadcast domain, you can see that we've also have a NFS broadcast domain with E0D-5 in that broadcast domain. If we head on over to volumes, here we've got our NFS Vol 1 and our Ansible Vol. So that's set up for NFS. If I edit one of them, you can see that the security style is Unix, which is all correct. Storage efficiency is as default, but you probably can put a parameter in to turn those on if you wish. And advanced is all on default. You can have a parameter to set that automatically resize this volume to grow or shrink if you like, but we did not do that in this demo. The other thing I want to show you is in SVMs again. If we click on the SVM and select edit, you can see that the resource allocation is to only allow the new data aggregate. That's so we don't install any volumes on the root aggregate. And if we click on SVM1 and we click up on SVM settings and select export policies, you can see just for the default policy, which is what we specified in our parameter, was to allow 192.168.2.0/24 for NFS. Lastly, I just want to show you the DNS settings for the SVM. And here we have our domain name and our DNS IP address. So as you can see with Ansible, setting up a NetApp cluster was really fast. I think it was less than about 1 minute. And we have a full system ready to go with vSphere, start to mount NFS data stores, and start using the storage on the NetApp system. So that concludes today's demonstration on using Ansible to automate your NetApp install. I really hope that you've enjoyed this demonstration, and if you have any comments, any questions in regards to the playbook or modules or anything like that, please leave a comment below. I'll do my best to answer them as fast as I can. But thanks very much for watching. Appreciate all you guys' support, and we'll see you in the next video.